Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hi-Fi Preschooling Kids weekly training podcast. We are so glad that you are all here with us this week. Now, we are doing podcasting a little bit differently this month in July as we look at the truths I am broken and God cares when I hurt. So this is the preschool specific podcast of God cares when I hurt. If you're looking for the kids podcast, we have that in our podcasting, wherever you can listen to podcasts. But this is the preschool specific podcast for week 2 of July. And joining me this week, we have Rachel and Kayla. Rachel and Kayla, how are you all doing today?
Great. Glad to be here.
Hey, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. Super happy to be here.
So this week, we are going to be looking at the main idea of God cares when I feel afraid. So, Kayla, Rachel, question for both of you. What is something that you were afraid of as a kid or a preschooler that maybe you are no longer afraid of now that you are adults? Kayla has her thinking face. Kayla has her thinking face.
I have my thinking face. Okay, so here's why I have my thinking face is because I don't know if you guys have ever read, there's a book out there. It's wonderful. It's called Afraid of All the Things. And I resonate with that book so much because I am afraid of all the things. So I'm trying to think of things that like I am no longer afraid of is a really hard thing for me to answer. I'm sure there's some that are out there. I'm thinking of, I guess the first thing that comes to mind are things that I am way less afraid of than when I was a kid, because a lot of my fears stem from like, I just don't want to get hurt. And so if there's something that is happening that I don't want to get hurt, I can remember vividly as a little kid, I got stung by a wasp on my little swing set outside my house. And so I was really, that's just a memory of like that hurt really bad and I didn't like it. And so I don't love wasp now, but I got outside and cleaned off some wasp nests the other day and it's fine. I'm okay with that. So I think just as I grow in like obviously knowledge and understanding and like pain management, but I'm not terrified of wasp like I was when I was a kid, but I still don't really love them. They're not my favorite. So
that's a good fear probably to still have though. Like you shouldn't just be going up and like introducing yourself to wasps. All right, Rachel, what about you?
I used to be afraid of storms, and so not horribly afraid, but I was afraid like the lights would go out or we'd have a tornado or something like that. And so I would say I'm not afraid anymore. I don't enjoy storms. I don't love when the electricity goes out because it's convenient or inconvenient. And where we live, we get a lot of bad storms and tornadoes and things like that. So I understand how damaging they can be, but I would say that I don't, it's not as irrational anymore.
So it sounds like both of you have gone from like, all right, this is a crazy, terrifying fear to, all right, now I have a rational fear of these things. I'm really proud of both of you because mine is completely different. So when I was like 9, I read The Hobbit, and there was the trap door of where the goblins come through while they're sleeping. Well, I was always afraid that the attic door of my garage when I was 9 years old was the trap door that the goblins came through. So every time my dad sent me out to the garage to get something, I moved so fast because I was afraid that the goblins were going to come through the ceiling and take me to their goblin leader. You know what? I still read The Hobbit like once a year, but I do not have a fear of goblins coming through my attic door any longer.
Well, I am proud of you, Isaac, that you don't have that fear any longer. That's a good thing.
Thank
That's
you.
A good thing.
I still carry around my sting sword when I'm like afraid of them, but it's fine. It's fine.
I'm just imagining you like going out to your garage as a grown man and like your wife being like, why are you running? So what are you doing? Why are you going so fast? I'm scared.
No, I'm trying to serve her quickly.
I was thinking, I've never considered anything coming out of her attic door.
Is
this unlocking a new fear for
me? Oh no. No. Nothing's coming out of your attic, Rachel. You're fine. Well, clearly there are some things that we are afraid of. Even now as adults, there are things that we are afraid of. And as we talk to preschoolers specifically about how God cares when I hurt, one of those hurts are feeling afraid. And preschoolers are still learning about the world around them, learning what is happening. Everything is new to a preschooler because they're meeting it for the very first time. So there are going to be things that they are afraid of. But we get to share with them that good news that God cares when they feel afraid. When they are having those fears in their life, God cares about them. And He's not going to suddenly make those fears go away, but we can trust that God cares for us and that He can see us through those times when we feel afraid. And we get to actually point at the story of how God cared for Elijah in 1 Kings 19. So, Kayla, would you mind unpacking that story and why we went with that story for this main idea?
Yeah, there were a lot of really good examples in the Bible of people who were scared. And so as we were looking through and talking about, okay, as we really help preschoolers understand this idea that God cares about us when we feel afraid, this story from 1 Kings 19 really jumped out to us as a story that really leaned in and talked about not only fear, but also peace. And so, as we look at this story, listeners, just to kind of help you with context, this is right after, Elijah calls down fire from heaven and everyone sees and recognizes this is the one true God. And then all of the things that happen after that. And so you have this like almost kind of mountaintop moment for Elijah when we think, wow, like he's so brave. Look at all these things he's doing for the Lord. Look at how he's pointing other people to see that this is the one true God and to worship and follow him. And then you flip the page and Elijah is terrified because you have Queen Jezebel who finds out everything that was going on. She's threatening to hurt and to kill him. And so he runs away. And so we see the very real reality of fear that happens in Elijah's life. And he goes away. I'm going to fast forward in our story to where he gets to the cave at Mount Horeb. And he spends the night there, and then God meets him. God speaks to Elijah. And it's so interesting that it is the fear of or the circumstance that causes him so much anxiety, and it's when he meets God and talks to God that we see the peace that overcomes him. And so Elijah is told by God to go and stand in front of the mountain in the Lord's presence. And then the wind passes by, but God's not in the wind. And the earthquake passes by, and God's not in the earthquake. The fire comes, and God's not in the fire. And then there is this small, still, quiet, soft voice. And when Elijah hears the voice of God, he wraps his face. He goes and stands in front of the entrance, and he's not afraid anymore. God gives him direction and instruction of what to do, and he does it. He listens to God and he follows him. And so we really feel like this Bible story was such a good one to talk about fear with preschoolers because we see, just like all of our emotions, fear is temporary. And oftentimes the fear that we have is caused by the circumstances around us. And it is when Elijah actually moved from focusing on his circumstance to focusing on the God who was with him that he found peace and he found resolve to keep going. Now, does that mean the circumstance changed? No. But what it meant was that Elijah's heart and emotions and what he was feeling changed because he was able to recognize how big God is, how powerful God is, and to put his trust in him, not in the circumstance that he had.
That is so true. I love that mindset shift of, hey, I'm not going to focus on what's around me. Instead, I am going to focus on God. And I think that's evident in even how we have set up things like the super clue and different elements with the super crew. Is we didn't want to give preschoolers something that they could be afraid of or something that could instigate a fear. So our super clue isn't a spider or fire or anything like that. Our super clue is an afraid face, because we don't want the kids, or we don't want the preschoolers to focus on the fear itself, but we want them to say, hey, I feel afraid. But instead of holding on to this fear, I'm going to turn this fear over to God, because he cares about my fear and he wants to help me through my fear. So Rachel, preschoolers, they really struggle with fear because they are experiencing a lot of new things. And some of those fears, they can seem a little bit silly to us. Let's be real. Like I'm sure if I ever told my dad, hey, I was afraid of the goblins coming through the ceiling, he'd be like, that's a dumb fear, Isaac. But it was still a fear that I was experiencing. So why is it important that we don't just dismiss these fears? And how can we look at this week's main idea and show, but how can this main idea make a difference for these young preschoolers' faith as they grow up?
Yeah, because like you said, preschoolers are afraid of a lot of things: the dark, storms, being alone. They feel fear when they go into a situation they've not been in before, or sometimes they feel fear when they meet a new person, because these things are just new and they've not experienced them before. And it's important for them to know that even if as an adult, we may think, oh, that's silly, there's nothing to be afraid of, their emotions are real and what they're feeling is real. And so we don't have to um, build it up and make it more than it is, but we do need to understand it and care for them and remind them that even when they're feeling afraid, whether it's something big in their lives that is really scary, or it's something really small, or imagine like the goblins coming down from the attic, that God cares for them when they feel afraid, that he cares for them and he's with them. Because as we build security in them, to understand that when they're afraid, no matter what they're going through, God is with them, that is going to be foundational, because fear is an aspect of all of our lives, no matter what age we are. And so it's such an incredible opportunity to build the foundation for preschoolers, that God cares when you feel afraid and he's with you, because that's not something that they grow out of. Fear happens to all of us. And so what a gift to teach them young that God's with them no matter what they're feeling.
For sure. For sure. Because that fear is not going to just suddenly go away when they learn this truth. It's not going to suddenly go away when they read this Bible story. There are going to be moments when they feel afraid again, and they have to again turn that fear over to God. So, question for everyone is, how can we help even the adults, even the older high schoolers that are volunteering, even the kids that we have in our own home, maybe, how can we help them as they get older, past even this preschool stage, when they struggle with fear?
That's a really good question, because, like all of these are all things that not just preschoolers experience. Like, we experience fear. And the older we get, the bigger our fears get. The more we understand about the world, sometimes the more fearful we get, because we have a better understanding of what's happening in our world, or the fears that we have. Yeah, they're just different. And so I think it's an important question to think through. And I think, kind of in the same way that we were just talking about with, the difference between looking at our circumstances versus who God is. And one of the things that's so distinct and different about Christianity is we're not just buying into a system of beliefs, right? Like, Christianity is about a person. It is about who God is and who Jesus is. And so the way that we grow in our faith is growing in relationship to God. And it's through growing in that relationship to him that our perspective changes on our circumstances. The circumstance may not change. The sickness may not go away, or the family dynamics may not change the way we want them to. But that doesn't change who God is. And so as we grow, yes, there's opportunity for our fears to get larger or change as well. But there's even a more opportunity for us to grow as we grow in our relationship to God, to understand fear in its proper perspective. I think it's important to say, like, we know, like, we're talking about fear in as it relates to things that we are afraid of and not trusting in God for. Now, we know, kind of like we said at the beginning, it's probably good for me to have a healthy fear of wasp. Like, that's a good thing, right? Fear is sometimes really good as a motivator for us to know danger and risk management and those types of things. So I think it's important just to remind ourselves we're not talking about the fears that we should have, but the ones that we shouldn't have, when we can trust in God, and when we can shift our perspective a little bit. Again, it doesn't mean that the circumstance is going to change, or if I do these things, God's going to be happy with me and he's going to make my life happy and good and easy. That's not the case. That's very different than what we read in the Bible. Most of the people who followed God had really difficult lives. They had really hard challenges. And the older they got, the harder those challenges got. But also, the more opportunity grew for them to grow closer to God, to understand who He is. And it's in growing in that relationship, and understanding and enjoying that relationship with God, that we are able to bring a better perspective to our circumstantial fears that are temporary.
Kayla, thank you for that. Now, leaders, I know I have enjoyed going through this content, both on the publishing side, but even weekly, as I have taught this to kids and preschoolers at my own church. And my prayer for all of us is that we would look at this content and not just teach it and say the words, but we would also absorb it and we would live it out in our own personal lives. So as we continue through this truth, next week we are going to be looking at how God cares when I feel sad. So you will not want to miss that. Again, thank you so much for joining us on the weekly training podcast here at Hi-Fi. We hope that you all have an absolute wonderful week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.